You're listening to Real Moments, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes and up front with dynamic women in art and entertainment. Now your host, founder of the Women's International Film Festival, the Film Fest diva herself, Yvonne McCormick-Lyons.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Real Moments with BadAss Women in Film and Entertainment. I'm Yvonne McCormick, as was mentioned in the intro. I'm really excited today to be speaking with Christina Kallas. Christina is a transnational New York-based feature writer and director. She's best known for her critically acclaimed ensemble dramas, The Rainbow Experiment and 42 Seconds of Happiness. And I can say that both of her films were screened at the Women's Film Festival over the past few years in New York City. She has been nominated for the political thriller The Commissioner, which released worldwide by Gravitas Ventures. The Rainbow Experiment debuted at the Slamdance Film Festival and Moscow International Film Festival in 2018. And in 2016, Kallas scored on the film festival circuit with her award-winning feature 42 Seconds of Happiness. She is a veteran in the film industry. She's a wonderful writer. She's a very amazing creative. And she's also known as author of books such as Creative Writing, Creative Screenwriting, Understanding Emotional Structure, and Inside the Writer's Room. She is an amazing woman, an amazing talent, and we're really, really excited that she's participating in Real Moments here today. And she's in New York. Christina, hey!
Hi, Yvonne. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
One little correction. The Commissioner wasn't released by Gravitas, but it's by Showtime Network. So I think Gravitas is the distributor for the Rainbow Experiment.
Okay. So that means that was on the Showtime Networks, and then the Rainbow Experiment, just to make sure that I'm clear, that one has recently been placed on Amazon. Do I have that correct?
Yes, the Rainbow Experiment, you can find it on Amazon, on Apple TV, on Tubi TV, on Vimeo, and it's worldwide. And the same applies to 42 Seconds of Happiness.
Okay.
The Commissioner, not so. It's an older film, so, it's currently not available.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up with a quick question about your ability to get your independent films on such amazing places like, Amazon Prime and Apple TV. I mean, that's an amazing feat. So congratulations to you on that. Is there any advice you can give to anyone about, how to go about that? If there's a couple of words that you could say to people who may have their film, and the worst thing about having a film, I shouldn't say it's the worst thing, but for you not to be able to get it screened and aired, and to have a film and not have the ability for people to see it?
Well, it's an interesting question because currently everything is changing again. And, I think every time you and I have talked over the past few years, everything was changing. So it's kind of constantly in flux. And obviously now, with the streaming wars and new big platforms with a lot of cash coming on the marketplace, it's not a particularly healthy place for independent filmmakers. So one thing is, getting on these platforms. Another thing is, what does it give you to be on these platforms? Are you able to recoup? Are you able to, get enough hits? Do you have a marketing budget to go above all those heavy, all those films with heavy marketing budgets that come from the studios or, the big players? And the answer is no. I mean, the answer is that even if you are on those websites, currently it's a very difficult time that the system is broken. And that is something that for independent filmmakers at least, but it's changing and it's evolving. So for instance, AVOD, so platforms which are supported by advertising like Tubi TV seem to be better for independent filmmakers right now than SVOD, and there seems to be a trend towards that. But also everything is going to change again, Yvonne, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, everything is shut down. There's so much that is being questioned right now, like film festivals going online, and what does that mean? And it's very much a landscape that does not allow one to really give advice in terms of what to do. What I can tell you is that a lot of filmmakers are deciding more and more to distribute independently, and that if they can't, land one of the big distributors who are going to invest in the marketing budget of their films, it seems to be, almost no profit in having one of the other companies to distribute your film. But, that might change again.
And I hear what you're saying. So basically, if you have a film and you're able to get it on Apple or Amazon Prime, for example, you really need to have a marketing budget to go along with it, because you're competing against all of the big name and smaller films that are on that marketplace. Am I correct?
Yes. It's very difficult to get your film seen, because if it's not recommended, you know how the algorithms work?
Yes.
When you go on all these streaming platforms, what recommendations do you get? And of course, if someone really is looking for your film, they will find it there. So you have to do a lot of work as a filmmaker to be able to have a constant stream of viewers. And, films are, once the film is on there, for the first months or even year, perhaps, there's a newness to it, so you can promote the hell out of it. But when you get, when your film is a year old, or it goes in its second year, in its third year, what can you do? You move on as a filmmaker to your next film, and of course you're building an audience, and that's the only strategy that I would advise, is to sort of, have a direct relationship to your audience as an independent filmmaker as much as possible, which is why festivals are so important for us as well, and kind of build your audience from one film to the next. So, I can see that people who had watched 42 Seconds of Happiness and loved it, they then came back to watch The Rainbow Experiment and loved it and recommended it to more people. So it kind of grows from film to film, both in terms of audience, but also in terms of press. But that's the only way, sort of, if you have constant output and you have a very sort of, idiosyncratic signature that people sort of come back to you because they're excited about what you're doing. That's different than, what somebody else does.
And so how do you cultivate that audience and keep them engaged so that they will be with you throughout the duration? To
be honest, I always feel like I'm doing too little for that. I know that there's a lot of filmmakers who do much more in terms of promotion than what I do. Sort of, I'm interested in making the next film, and I'm working on the next film while the previous one is already coming out. So I kind of think, okay, the audience will. I mean, the only thing that I can do, the way that I see it, is to be as serious and committed and creative about what I'm doing, and that ultimately the people will sort of come back or gather around me or whatever, or be interested in what I'm doing because of that. Because I want them to see, I want them to see the films, and I want that discussion to be had, because there's always a lot of discussion around each film,
Yeah. And I see that you're very active on social media as well. So I think that's probably part of the way that you're able to keep your audience aware of the projects that you're working on and things like that. And I think that really helps, because if we're seeing images of you and the crew and you're shooting and this component, I think by the time that the film comes out, now I'm really interested in seeing it. I've been following you along the ways. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mention that because I think that that's like absolutely given or necessary,
Yes.
on those platforms, and we have to communicate with whatever audience we have through those platforms. And so, yes, I'm active there on, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter as much as I can.
Yeah.
So
No, because I know that I learned about, your new film, Harlem Blues, through following you on Instagram, actually. And I thought, oh, this looks really cool. And I was looking forward, to see, hey, look what Christina's up to now. She's so cool, So I think those images really help, because sometimes it's difficult, as you said, you're a filmmaker and you're going from one film to another. And you also teach in the New York City area at various schools. And so you have a lot on your plate, but at least doing this, you may not be able to always reach out to the people in your circle because, you're so busy. So at least, through doing for social media, people can see what you're up to. And I just think that's just a good advice for anybody with whatever project that they're doing. So why don't you tell me about what you're working on now? Let's talk a little bit about that. It does seem really fascinating.
Right. Well, the film is actually called Paris is in Harlem, which is the title refers to a couple of things, and perhaps I can tell you more about that later, but it also refers to the main location of the film, which is the Paris Blues Jazz Dive in Harlem, which is for me, it has been like a second home over the years. I live in Harlem. I sometimes jokingly, but also seriously say I moved to Harlem because of the Paris Blues Bar. And it's just one of those places that, a reminder of the resilience of New York. And it's like, from another time in a way. It hasn't, gone with, gentrification or whatever. It's just a wonderful place. And unfortunately, as you may have heard or seen, it was the owner of the bar, Sam Hargress Jr., who was a really close friend, and for me also the inspiration for this film, was one of the early victims of COVID-19 in New York City. He died on April 10, just a day after his 81st birthday.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Sorry for your loss.
Thank you. And that completely, devastated us all, and not just us. I mean, I'm still getting messages from all over the world. I mean, it's amazing how far-reaching Sam was in terms of, everybody who came to New York and was into jazz would come to the Paris Blues, and obviously, it's not. It's the whole jazz community has been hit because the bars were left open probably a week or two too long. And that's very unhappy and unfortunate. So now that this film that was shot there in November and that I was in the midst of editing when the shutdown started, is to me, like a tribute to Sam and his legacy and to New York City's jazz community. So even more so than it was before.
Yeah.
So
taking on an extra meeting now because the founder, has passed, unfortunately, during this crazy time that we're in.
Yeah, it's a crazy time on so many levels. When I'm looking at the film now, I mean, I'm, as I said, I'm in the midst of editing. I'm kind of wondering where there's so many things in there that speak to now. It's in a way, it's a deeply political film because it deals with all the isms that separate us, specifically, racism and sexism and classism, and that is something that there's a lot of scenes and moments in there that I've been working on for the last couple of years, while writing the script and working with my actors before shooting. As you know, I worked for a very long time with my actors before shooting. And that is something that I'm really surprised that how, all those extremely intense discussions that we're having now, they were already there so many years ago. It's like, you sort of grasp them in the air, you sort of take them, and work them into something. So does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes,
Perhaps
for
I
sure.
should say it again. Yeah.
So where do you go from here with the film now? So what are the plans?
Well, one more thing that I wanted to say concerning that is that, the Rainbow Experiment, it was in your festival, the discussions around it, and, that many people keep saying that I'm my film sort of capture that New York energy, and, you have the sense that it's like New York pure,
Yes.
And authentic, and I think that is really important to me. And in terms of this film in particular, it's really important to me because there's something about making a film that has to do with that separation, that strong separation that is all over the world. We're living through really, very, very weird and dark times. And there's a sense of conflict and separation in many countries, not only in the US, but in the US it has sort of taken a very extreme development. And I think that looking at that world of separation through the eyes of somebody who comes from the outside, because remember, I'm European. I may be here for 7 to 8 years making films in New York, but I come with the eyes of somebody from the outside, looking at something with the eyes of an alien and somebody who has lived in many countries. And so I don't have like a particular perspective, but I think that I have like a way of looking at things, from all sorts of different perspectives. And that's something that is really important to me because that viewpoint is as a woman and as a woman coming from a small country, all my films, and they are with the eyes of an outsider, because I'm, if you want, I'm an alien in all countries, even in my birth country, which is Greece. I haven't lived there long enough as an adult to have that perspective of a Greek person living in Greece. And then I lived in Berlin, and then I moved again. I lived in London. I lived in, so it's kind of, I've been always moving around, and New York is sort of my inspiration. I love New York, and that's why I'm making one film after the other in New York, and sort of looking at New York and what is happening to the city now with the eyes of an alien, is kind of part of what I'm doing.
So how does what's going on now, we know we're all dealing with protests are going on across the country in other parts of the world, actually. And so I know you're dealing with this film. Certainly, it's about an African-American man, and tell me if I'm wrong, that, started this jazz club in New York City, and he passed away. I believe he was 84. So he's definitely at his age. I can imagine there must be some amazing stories of what happened at that club. I can just imagine, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm thinking like Speakeasy. I'm thinking like the great jazz artists who came through. I mean, to Harlem, it must be an amazing story that you're telling. And then you're doing it now, in the context of a time when we are looking at very strongly, we're looking at race issues in this country. Perhaps, race issues has always been an issue in America, since its founding or before its founding. But, there's so many things that are coming to the fore now with what we're seeing with the police and our video cameras that are able to capture some of the things that, have been happening. And so it's kind of out there as a major discussion. You are at the same time, working on this film, and unfortunately the owner passed away. And is there any, kind of relation with what you're doing in terms of what's going on right now?
Well, yeah, I think that I think that the film is very political in that sense, because it deals indeed with races, with classism, which is an ism that we all too much forget about, and sexism, and all those moments between human beings that that we seem to or pretend to understand on a superficial level. But what I'm saying is that we don't really face them, like the insistence of all white people, or many white people, to say we're not racist. I'm not racist. That's one of the things that I wanted to look at. Is it possible? One of the characters in the film says, "Can you be white? Do you think it's possible to be white and not be racist?" And there's a lot of questions that are being raised through the film. It sort of holds up a mirror to how we relate to each other, how we're sort of seeing it as a black and white construct, but actually it's a much more complex issue. And if we're not sort of straightforward and honest about all that, we're never going to get to the next stage. And so I think that that's really important right now, to not stay on the surface of saying, okay, they are bad, we are not, we're all part of the system, and we're all part of the problem, So for me, that is something that we need to talk about now, we need to sort of look at it with honesty and less defensive,
Actually, I had that conversation with someone last night. As you know, I'm an African American, and the woman that I was speaking with was a white American, and we were having a conversation, and she was talking about the looting that happened here in Miami. And, I said to her, for me, I don't even want to, talk about that. And we, that's not the point of, we're losing the point of the discussion. The discussion is not about that. We don't know who the people are that are looting. There are people coming in from the outside who are taking up this opportunity, and it changes the focus of the issue at hand. And then she said to me, well, I'm very embarrassed. And, I said to her, well, let's have that discussion. Let's have that discussion about, your embarrassment and why you're embarrassed.
Exactly.
And now we can have an open dialogue, and I can talk from my perspective and you can tell me, and then we don't have to skirt the issue. I mean, because that's how we can, that's how we can grow. I mean, I know they did that in South Africa, right? After,
Right.
And it really, really helped to heal as opposed to skirting the issue. And I think that's what's happened here. One set of people are denying, the other set of people are saying, but hey, look at this and look at that and look at this and look at that. But the question becomes, if we can just admit that there's a problem, then we can move forward.
Yes.
Because the first thing, no matter what it is, if you're an alcoholic, for example, if you don't admit that you're an alcoholic, you're not going to get treatment, And so, it's all about that. And I think that's what we all want. We all want to heal, right? We all want to be better, and we all want to do better. And we can do that, we can do that, but we have to be able to have honest, open discussions. So yes. I really, really agree with what you said. I really, really do.
And I think that, it's about time that we do that, because if we don't, then, the whole story, it's like a Groundhog Day, right?
Yes.
It repeats again and again and again and again. And if we don't look at ourselves, we cannot change society if we always, show with a finger at somebody else. We have to sort of, honestly look at, it's a systemic failure, it's a systemic failure, but the system is us. So that is really important. And in a way, I'm not sort of, saying, I think this conversation that you've been having is a conversation and a situation that I've been having with my actors the whole time while we were working on this. And I think we've had some amazing insights in the room while working, because we were able to sort of go beyond that first stage of embarrassment and start talking honestly and interacting honestly without, trying to show that, oh, I'm good, the other person is bad, and just pronounce some hard truths. And we need to be able to pronounce those hard truths.
Yes. And it's interesting as you mentioned that. I was just remembering that I was having a conversation with a woman that used to work for Google, and she was talking to us as someone who's, involved with running the Women's Film Festival. And so she was just talking about the whole concept of, unconscious bias, that's something we all have, right? That we're not even necessarily aware of it in many ways, whether that's sexism or ageism or racism. Right. We can all, take a look inside and see, how we can do better. And I think that's ultimately what we all want, how we can do better. Right. So with Mr. Hargress passing, how does that impact you in terms of finishing up the film? How is that impacting you in terms of that?
Well, it's impacting me in terms of my, my emotional state, because Sam was always, he's been a friend for many years, and, he came to the Rainbow Experiment, for instance, when it started. When it premiered in New York.
Oh, that's nice.
It premiered at the Harlem Film Festival, because I'm always, I'm a big supporter of the Harlem Film Festival, and I think that it's, the guys are doing a great job. So he came, the whole bar came to the premiere.
Nice.
The MC on the 125th, and then he did a big party at the bar, and it was just, and he loved the film, and so he supported very much the making of this one. He basically just he was open to anything that I needed to be able to film there. For me, it was always, I always thought, okay, I was thought of that moment when I can show him the film and when he can be next to me when the film premieres, and I won't have that anymore. And that makes me very, very sad, because, 84 sounds like, of course he has lived a very rich life, but he was also one of these people who, you just know they're going to live another 20 years. They're going to just be, because he really, he was full of love and life and compassion and energy. And so I miss him very much. And that's something that is impacting me emotionally, of course.
Yes.
I just want as many people as possible to know about him, and that I think the film has, if I captured a little bit of his spirit and his incredible, inspirational aura, then I'll be happy.
Wow. I'm just thinking how timing, is so important, and that you were able to spend time with him and do all the shooting before he passed. That's really amazing and a good thing. So tell me what's going on now. I know that you had to stop editing. Is that it when COVID-19 broke out and you went
right? On? So now, as I said in the beginning, it's an interesting moment. I don't know really what is going to happen, because we're all sort of waiting to see how it evolves. We already know that there's not going to be any live festivals for a while. Online festivals are not the same. With my previous two films, because they, I'm international, so the films have traveled in, at least 4 continents throughout their festival run, and I always traveled with them. I'm really excited about having that direct conversation with audiences, and a festival run gives you that. So, with the Rainbow Experiment, I was in China, I was in Russia, I was in Africa, I was in Europe, obviously, and obviously I had a long festival run in the US, and that you cannot have anymore. So the initial reaction was, okay, then, it will take me another year to finish it, and then I'll come out a year from now. I don't know. I have no answer to that. We'll see. We'll see what Sundance is going to do. We'll see what the big festivals. Venice has announced that it's going to take place. Toronto is going to have a digital version. We'll see what it means for distributors. I think there's a lot of conversations going on right now, and some say, it's kind of an evolving situation, Some say wait it out. Some say, no, get it out, So I don't know. What is your take on that?
I think you should play it by ear. I believe that the festivals have a place. Not only do they help when it comes for time for after the run, and as you mentioned, talking about whether it goes on demand or whether it gets distributed, through theaters. I think that, I was actually in a conversation last week I was participating in an online discussion, and the discussion really wasn't about filmmakers. It was about Asian women filmmakers. I mean, it wasn't about the film festivals, but they were talking about that as well. They were talking about the fact that the festivals have a place in terms of being able to see the film with an audience and getting their reaction. And there's an importance and a value to that. And also, I think in terms, as you mentioned, in terms of building up that audience that will follow you, so that if you do go to on demand, you already have an audience in place that's going to support that film. And I know those first few months are really important when it goes online. And I if I were you, I would wait it out a little bit and let's see what happens in terms of 2021. As you said, we don't really know what Sundance is going to do yet, but continue their editing and keep working at it. And I would just play it by ear for now. Yeah. Because we're still pretty early in the process of COVID. Things are just dwindling down in New York City where you are. And thank goodness you're okay, because I really have been nervous at first with all the people I know who are in New York, since it was the epicenter for this country. But, we don't know what may happen in 3 or 4 months. Yeah.
Yeah. And on one hand, I want to, because the film speaks so much about all these conversations that we're having right now. And, I want it to be out there so that people can have that discussion. But I remember when I was going around with the Rainbow Experiment, when it had its festival run, all the amazing conversations after its screening, they were part of that event. And of course you can have, Q&As over Zoom meetings. We all have all those Zoom meetings right now, but it's not the same in terms of, for me right now, it doesn't feel like it's the same, but it's a very recent thing. So I think that festivals are, starting to figure out ways to replenish that, and we'll see what happens. We'll see how it evolves. We'll see if there's a second wave. We'll see how long it takes. And also it's a matter of headspace. There's so much right now in terms of, we're going through a deep trauma on so many levels, and it's a very existential period of time. So it's difficult to take your mind off what's going on out there. And it's right that we shouldn't, that we should be out there in the sense of listening, in the sense of processing all that is happening to the world and to each one of us. And I think that we all need that time,
I agree. Christina, this has obviously been wonderful speaking with you again. I'm always a fan of what you do and your work. Before we go, how can people support you? Is there anything that you'd like to mention for our audience? How can we support you?
Well, I'd love, for me, both my previous films, The Rainbow Experiment and 42 Seconds of Happiness, they're still very actual. The Rainbow Experiment deals with the education system, and it's how we become who we are, and how we parent our children, and how we teach our children, and how the systemic failure starts in our education system, and it's extremely education is an extremely, it's a major factor in the general situation. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's really important that people continue, watching those films and that, spreading the word about those films and having that conversation. So I'm always very excited to hear from people that have watched, that have discovered one or the other film and have something to say about it. So definitely, watching the films and spreading the word about them, and through social media or, through actual reviews and audience reviews and ratings, and also, on IMDb and on Amazon and wherever they are, Rotten Tomatoes and so on. It's really an important part of support system for independent filmmakers. So I think that's the major thing to ask, if I can, express and ask.
No, that's wonderful. That's why we're here. That's exactly what we're here for. And I'll make sure I put links to them in the show notes at YvonneMcCormack.com/podcast. Then I'll just make sure that all the links, as many as possible, are there where everybody can find the movies. And for everybody that's listening, you definitely need to watch them. The Rainbow Experiment was just an amazing, I don't know how you did that. It was like there's all these things going on at the same time, and there was like not a moment where it was just, everything was just constantly exciting and you were wondering what's going on. And I just thought that it was brilliantly written. And I just loved the way that movie was done. So everybody, I encourage you to definitely watch it. Christina really has a unique voice. So Christina, thank you for taking the time again to be with us for another edition of Real Moments with Badass Women. This is a badass woman. I can't wait to see Paris in Harlem, and we will keep our audience abreast of once the decision is made on how to get it out and how to distribute. And,
yes.
I know you're going to see what happens in the near future. You're more than welcome to come back when it's getting ready to debut so we can talk about the finished product and how people can support you then.
Absolutely. Yes, I'd love that. And I'll get in touch with you once
yes.
This moment comes. But it's one last thing to say about it is that it's, I always make those multi-protagonist films. I kind of believe that there's something to be earned by having, not the single protagonist point of view that most of storytelling has. So all my films have several protagonists. The Rainbow Experiment had 36 main characters. The Paris is in Harlem has now 22 main characters. Yes. So that's a really important aspect of what I'm doing, and it's kind of exciting to see how everyone who watches the film what's happening with the audience. For me, it's a discussion. It's kind of an interactive relationship between the audience, each single audience member, and in the film, and that's really important.
Absolutely. And I think it's definitely a very unique voice and very interesting way of telling a story. As you said, it's very different. But what that certainly means is that there's never a dull moment, right? Because there are different interpretations of something that's happened, right? And from my perspective, this is the way I saw it from that perspective, and this is how it went down from that other person. So it makes for very interesting, very, very interesting dialogue, very interesting narration. So I want to thank you once again for coming on, and then we'll just keep in touch throughout the coming months. And I wish you all the best. Sorry for your loss with Mr. Hargress. I know that must be very difficult for you, and to be editing and knowing that this, person that you were close to and that, was end up being part of the subject of this film, at least his location, and, you've lost him before he's had a chance to actually, see the final product. But I'm sure he's smiling at you, Christina, and so from wherever he is in heaven,
Yeah, he'll always be with me.
Yes.
And he'll always, be with everybody that he touched, during his life. And that's really important. And, I kind of feel him being around through this whole sadness and upset that we're going through right now. So yes, thank you so much, Yvonne.
You're welcome. We'll definitely stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you as well for being with us. Thanks very much. I'd like to thank our guest once again for joining us, and I'd also like to personally thank you for spending time with us for another edition of Real Moments. To continue our discussion, follow me on Instagram and Twitter at FilmFestiva, or join our Facebook group, Real Moments Podcast. If you're interested in knowing more about the Women's International Film Festival and Conference, log on to womensfilmfest.com. We're actually really excited right now about our membership program with online seminars, films, and masterclasses. You definitely want to be a part of it. You can find more info at womensfilmfest.com. And finally, if you already have a film and need help with marketing or distribution or promoting, including red carpet services, my company, McCormack Media Group, can help you with that. You can reach out to me at Yvonne at womensfilmfest.com. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.